The economy is a disaster. Look at Q4 GDP growth of just 0.7. We're headed for a recession. In fact, for all of last year, GDP grew just 2.2%. That's 20% below the 2.8% from 2024. But it is slowing fast. And all of this was before the war. Now that Trump started a war, the situation is going to get a lot worse. The national debt just went past 39 trillion, I think, yesterday. I think we're going to blow through 50 trillion over the next 3 years because recession, rising interest rates, war, and a housing crisis are going to send our budget deficits through the roof.
Our buddy, economist Peter Schiff, I don't know how he keeps getting invited back on to CNBC, but I'm glad that they have him back on because and Fox, because he speaks the truth. Oh yeah, he's on Fox right there. But he's usually on CNBC, and he doesn't hold back when it comes to tearing apart Trump's economy, which I appreciate. Now, before we get to some of the details of his argument, Cenk, your 2 cents.
Yeah, so he's definitely right about inflation and about slowing down of the economy, which means, that means we could hit stagflation. Guys, as bad as things are now, it looks like things are about to get much worse. So let's give you the facts on it and then come back and analyze how bad it's going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what Peter Schiff is absolutely fuming about. And so, look, before we go on, it's really important to do this disclosure, as we do anytime we cover a story involving Peter Schiff. He does gold investing. He runs a gold investing company, meaning that he does have a financial incentive to encourage people to invest in gold. That being said, he speaks the truth when it comes to our current economic situation and what we have coming ahead. Now, that disclosure aside, here's more from his appearance on Fox Business.
None of the FOMC members are voting for a hike, and that's what we need. But they're afraid to deliver a hike because of what it would do to the markets, to the economy. You know, when you talk about the resilience of the American consumer, it's all based on the ability of the consumer to go deeper into debt, to buy more products he can't afford, and that we didn't help produce. And it's all about leverage. And so the Fed understands this. And in fact, if the Fed starts hiking interest rates, one of the most impacted is the US government itself, because the cost of servicing the debt explodes as interest rates go up. Meanwhile, look at the housing data that came out today. Home sales are collapsing because real estate prices are at least 30% overpriced nationwide. And we are on the cusp of a decline in housing prices, at least as great as the decline in 2007, 2008 that precipitated the 08 financial crisis. And I think the economy is even more leveraged now than it was then.
So there is a lot to unpack from what he just said there, but let's start with interest rates. So the Federal Reserve just yesterday voted to leave interest rates unchanged. So they're at 3.5 to 3.75%. Now, specifically, Schiff mentioned the FOMC, which stands for the Federal Open Market Committee. These are the individuals who vote on whether or not they increase, decrease, or keep the interest rates where they're at. Now, 11 of its 12 members voted to leave interest rates unchanged. Only one individual voted to lower interest rates. Now, Peter Schiff believes that the Fed should be raising interest rates in order to keep inflation from spiraling out of control. And he also discussed US consumer debt. But before we get to consumer debt, Cenk, which is disastrous, your thoughts about interest rates, because there's no winning, if you ask me.
No, they should keep them where they are.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so look, I'm not the definitive expert on it, but I know that lowering the interest rates as you're about to have significant, have started to have significant inflation already, it's over. You shouldn't lower interest rates, but you're about to have much worse inflation. Because again, remember guys, oil isn't just about gas prices. Gas prices affect the cost of all goods in two different ways. One is oil also goes into plastics and many of the other products that we buy. But second one, when gas prices are higher, it also increases the cost of transporting the products to the stores, to your homes, etc. So it increases prices for all goods. So this war is a debacle, and Peter Schiff is right. We were already headed in the wrong direction. Now we're like in hyperdrive in the wrong direction. no way you should cut rates. In terms of increasing rates, I'm worried that AI has begun to cause an unemployment apocalypse, and we're at the tip of that iceberg. So if you increase rates, I'm worried about how it's gonna slow the economy too much. So we're kind of stuck. We're now in an interest rate quagmire, partly because of the quagmire that Trump put us on in Iran.
When it comes to consumer debt, and remember, interest rates are important when you're considering consumer debt as well. Well, total consumer debt in the United States did hit a record of $18.8 trillion at the end of 2025, according to data from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, incorporating all types of debt. That includes credit card bills, auto loans, and mortgages. Now, mortgage debt is not toxic debt, right? Mortgage debt, you have an asset, you can sell that asset, maybe you've built equity. But why don't we focus on, credit card debt specifically, okay? Because if you look at credit card debt, the New York Fed reported that credit card balances hit a new high of $1.28 trillion, and that's 5.5% higher than the year prior. This is not good. This is a disaster, especially when you take into consideration what the interest rates are on credit cards. Okay, much higher on credit cards than it is when it comes to what the Federal Reserve sets interest rates at. We're talking 20-25%. And so a lot of Americans are struggling right now. They're not making enough money to make ends meet. They're not getting much support from the federal government. And so what are they doing? They're just putting their life essentials on credit cards. It's really bad. So speaking of debt, the US national debt, as you heard Schiff say in that video, did hit a record $39 trillion. The Congressional Budget Office projects that in 10 years, the nation will annually be spending more than $2 trillion just on debt service. The national debt will exceed $40 trillion by the end of October, the Peterson Foundation projects. And finally, there's the housing market, which Schiff also touched on. So mortgage rates are creeping up as the war drags on when it comes to mortgages specifically. So the average 30-year fixed rate mortgage rose to 6.22%, up from 6.11% a week earlier. Mortgage rates dipped below 6% in February, days before the war started, but they have been rising since then. And that is on top of a historically unaffordable housing market. In 2025, for instance, the average age of a first-time home buyer was 40 years old, which is a record high. Home prices have never been as high as they are right now. They're at records. And with all that aside, let's find out how Americans feel about the economy right now.
Voters on Trump and the cost of living. You go back when he was reelected back in October of 2024, he was beating Kamala Harris by 3 points on the cost of living, right? Look at his net approval rating now. Woo! Down underwater we go. His net approval at a record low, 41 points below water. You can't win when you're at 41 points below water on the cost of living.
What about independence?
Yeah, what about independence? You think this 41 points below water is bad? Take a look at independence. It's even worse. I mean, 60 points underwater when it comes to Trump and the cost of living among independents. Again, a record low. You go back to October of 2024, he was winning on this issue over Kamala Harris by 11 points. Look at that switcheroo. That is a 71-point switcheroo in the wrong direction.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care. You think Trump cares? Trump only thinks about himself. You think he cares about the Republican Party? He doesn't care about the Republican Party.
No.
Revel in it, Republicans. Revel in providing cover for this absolute demon. Anyway, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, he does care about his own ego though, and he's going to leave the White House in humiliating fashion. So, okay, first a quick tangent. Yesterday, CNN and Harry Anton, who I otherwise like, did this absurd poll where they showed the people who still call themselves MAGA, 100% of them support Trump.
That was embarrassing. I can't believe you guys actually aired that poll. That was genuinely one of the most embarrassing segments I've seen on cable television, and that's saying a lot.
You guys get it, right? It's circular logic. So they say, if you like Trump, tell us if you like Trump. And they go, wait, I just told you I like Trump. 100%. So they did that in the context of war. Why? Because they want Trump to stay in the war. And they don't want Trump getting rattled that he's losing his base when he supports Israel in the war. Now, when they turn to the economy, all of a sudden, they let you in on the most important fact. He's lost all the Trump voters who were independents. They're gone. So his base is annihilated because he won because of the independents that's voted for him, right? And so, and by the way, and people who used to call themselves MAGA, but no longer do, who are all over online writing MAGA's dead, right? So that it was incredibly deceptive yesterday. Today, they level with you. Oh yeah, Trump's lost everyone, okay, in terms of the independents. All right, now let's go to the heart of this issue on the economy. Number one, I want you to understand how devastating that $2 trillion is in interest payments we have to make every year. Because if the economy heats up too much, like meaning like inflation, we need to raise the interest rates at the Fed, what we were just talking about, right? And so, and you would raise the interest rates if the inflation is getting too high, like we did recently, right? And inflation is going to get higher and higher as we're talking about. But when you raise the interest rates, that makes paying off your debt much harder and more expensive. So you're gonna have to pile a whole new set of debt on top of that. Now, when you look at what did we spend the money on? Well, we spent 8 out of the 39 trillion on the global war on terror, as an example. But that was not global at all. It had nothing to do with South America or Australia or East Asia or Europe. It was only against Israel's neighbors. That's just 8 trillion out the door on that alone. And now we have a new war, part of the global war on Israel's neighbors. Now we're asked to put in another $200 billion, and that's just the beginning. That's the tip of the iceberg. We're about to put in ground troops based on all the things that they're saying. We haven't even put in the ground troops yet, and they're asking for 200 billion. So you're gonna add a couple more trillion on that. And what's amazing about that is Israel doesn't borrow the money from China to pay for its own wars and the genocide and the land conquest that they're doing, etc. They say, no, America, you have to borrow the money from China and you have to give it to us for free, and not only give us that money, but pay the interest the rest of your life, okay? So you and your kids and your grandkids will pay the interest that for the money we borrowed to give to Israel, both in direct payments of $330 billion and in trillions of dollars in the wars that we're doing for Israel. So this is the great American robbery. And it's not just about Israel, guys. All the donors have robbed us. The oil companies to this day get billions, tens of billions in subsidies. Why are we giving the most profitable companies in the world our money? Because they gave same exact reason for that we're giving it to Israel. Because the lobbyists for the oil companies bribed our disgusting politicians who are the very worst and most immoral people in America. And because of those bribes, they're like, oh great, no problem. Here's American taxpayers' money. Israel, oil companies, and wait till you get to big pharma. They've ripped us off of trillions of dollars. And the people who helped them do that is the scumbag incumbent politicians. Vote them all out. Unless their name is Ro O'Connor or Tom Massey, or you know with absolute certainty that they're not betraying you, they are. Just because they're in your party doesn't mean they're good guys. No, the people in your party, whichever party it is, are also disgustingly immoral. You think they don't know everything we just told you? They know, and they screw you over on purpose anyway. So lastly, guys, anecdotes. Every person I'm talking to, barber, Uber driver, dry cleaner, they're like, all business is slowing down. And they started slowing down before the war. Now afterwards, slowing down more. We're in for a world of hurt here. And our politicians aren't gonna help us. They're the ones betraying us. So normally I'm optimistic, but I'm sorry to report there's a lot of bad news coming.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.